There are places in this world that exist just outside the reach of civilization. Places where the highway stretches so far in both directions that the nearest town feels like a rumor. Where the only light for miles comes from a flickering neon sign and a row of fuel pumps that hum through the night like something living, something patient. Gas stations. The kind that are so old, they still have handwritten price boards, sun-bleached and barely legible. The kind where the bathroom key is attached to a hubcap so you don't walk off with it, as if anyone in their right mind would want to stay long enough to steal anything. The kind where the attendant never quite meets your eyes, and the coffee has clearly been sitting on the burner since sometime yesterday, and the security camera in the corner is almost certainly not plugged in. The kind where you stop because you have no other choice, and you leave feeling like something followed you back to the car, feeling like something watched your taillights until they disappeared into the dark and then went back to waiting. Tonight, we are going to talk about 3 of those places. 3 gas stations that real people encountered on real roads, in real America. 3 stories submitted to online forums and true crime communities by people who still swear years later, that what happened to them was not normal. Not coincidence. Not their imagination running wild from too many hours on the road and too much bad coffee and the particular madness that descends when you've been driving alone in the dark for too long. These are the stories that don't make the news because there's no body, no arrest, no tidy resolution. These are the ones that live in the space between what happened and what almost happened. And in some ways, those are the most terrifying stories of all. Because the mind is very good at closing the door on horror when there's a clear ending, when the case is solved, when the criminal is caught, when the victim is named. It's much harder to close the door when the ending is simply, and then I drove away, and I don't know what it was, and I never found out. And sometimes, late at night, I still think about it. These 3 people drove away. They are, as far as we know, safe, and none of them have ever stopped thinking about it. Before we begin, I want you to understand something important about the geography of fear in this country. The United States has approximately 150,000 gas stations. The vast majority of them are perfectly mundane, bright, corporate, standardized, with the same logo and the same layout, and the same refrigerated section of energy drinks, whether you're in Oregon or Florida. Those stations are not what we're talking about tonight. Tonight, we are talking about the other kind. The independent stations. The ones that have been in the same family for 3 generations and have never been updated since the second one took over. The ones that appear on old highway maps, but not on Google. The ones that are open, according to the sign, but seem to have no particular interest in customers. The ones that sit on roads where the cell service has been gone for 40 miles, and the nearest police presence is a county sheriff's office that covers an area the size of Rhode Island. These places exist. There are more of them than you would think, and if you drive enough miles on enough back roads, you will eventually pull into one of them at the wrong time of night, and you will feel, in a way that is almost cellular, almost below conscious thought, that something is wrong. You will feel it before you can articulate it. You will feel it the way a deer feels it when the wind shifts and carries the smell of something that shouldn't be there. The question is whether you'll trust that feeling, whether you'll act on it, or whether you'll talk yourself out of it, the way that rational, reasonable modern people do, and spend the next several years wishing you hadn't. Take a breath, make sure your doors are locked, turn up the volume, and let's begin. Story 1. The gas station on Route 375. Route 375 in Nevada is officially called the Extraterrestrial Highway. The state legislature gave it that name in 1996, partly as a joke and partly as an economic development strategy, a nod to Area 51 and the UFO enthusiasts and conspiracy theorists who make pilgrimages to the Nevada desert looking for evidence that the government is hiding something in the vast restricted airspace south of Rachel. It worked to a degree. A few motels and diners in the tiny towns along the route put up alien-themed signs. A gift shop opened. Tourism, of a sort, trickled in. The highway got a reputation as a quirky road trip destination for people who liked that kind of thing. But if you've ever actually driven that road at night, and I mean really driven it, not a quick sunset loop, but the full length of it after dark, with your phone dropping signal, and the last town behind you 20 miles, and the next one 40 miles ahead, you know that the alien mythology is not what's unsettling about it. What's unsettling is the silence, the absolute, total, crushing silence of the Nevada desert after dark, broken only by the wind and the distant sound of nothing at all. The desert at night is not quiet in the way that a library is quiet. It is quiet in the way that outer space is quiet. It is a silence with weight to it, with presence. The silence of a place that was here for millions of years before human beings arrived and will be here for millions of years after we're gone. And that has absolutely no interest in us whatsoever. The sky helps. On a clear night with no moon, Route 375 offers one of the most spectacular views of the Milky Way available in the continental United States. The nearest significant light pollution is Las Vegas, 100 miles to the south, and the darkness around the highway is so complete that the stars cast faint shadows. People who have seen it describe it as disorienting, beautiful but almost overwhelming. The scale of it so much larger than anything you normally perceive that your sense of your own size and significance shifts in a way that feels, in the moment, slightly dangerous. Like looking over a cliff. You don't quite trust your own equilibrium. This is the road that Carla was on in the summer of 2018. Carla, she uses the handle Carla Desert Drive on Reddit and has asked that her last name not be used, is a graphic designer from Los Angeles. She was driving from Las Vegas to Reno, a trip she had made several times before, usually on US 95 or I-80, the main routes. But this time, she had taken a detour to see a friend in Tonopah, and on the way back, her GPS had rerouted her onto 375 after it detected a reported accident backing up the main highway. She accepted the reroute without thinking much about it. She had driven in Nevada before. She figured it was just another desert road. By the time she realized how remote it was, she was already well into it. Her gas tank, which she had meant to fill in Tonopah and had instead decided she'd fill in the next town, was sitting just above a quarter. She did the math. A quarter tank was probably 60 miles. She had no cell service, no way to look up where the nearest gas station was, and no way of knowing exactly how far she was from anything. She told herself not to panic. The highway was numbered. It was a real road. There would be a gas station. There was. About 40 miles into her drive on 375, she saw it, a glow on the horizon. Faint at first, the kind of thing you're not sure you're really seeing when the surrounding darkness is that complete. But it got brighter as she approached and eventually resolved into the unmistakable shape of an old-fashioned gas station. 2 pump islands, a small attached convenience store, a single overhead light on a tall pole that bathed everything in a color she describes as sickly yellow, the particular shade of light that makes everyone look slightly ill. She pulled in just after 11 at night. The lot was almost entirely empty. There was one other vehicle, an older model pickup truck, dark colored. She thought maybe dark blue or dark green. Hard to tell in that light. It had Arizona plates. It was not parked at a pump. It was parked off to the side of the building, not in a marked space, just pulled up against the building's side wall, in the shadow zone between the overhead light's reach and the absolute darkness beyond the property. She noticed it. She registered it. She didn't think too hard about it. People sleep in their trucks on long drives through the desert. It happens. It's not unusual. She told herself this and got out to pump her gas. The night was absolutely still. The desert at that hour is genuinely soundless in a way that few places are. No insects, no wind, no distant highway noise, because the nearest highway with any meaningful traffic was miles away. The only sound was the mechanical clicking of the fuel pump as the numbers ticked upward. She remembers looking up at the sky and being stopped by it. The Milky Way blazing overhead in a solid river of light. More stars than she had ever seen in her life. The kind of sky that makes you feel both small and somehow significant at the same time, like being witnessed by something very large. She stood there for a moment with the gas nozzle in her car and her head tilted back, and she thought, "This is beautiful. This is worth the drive." Then she heard the door of the convenience store open. She looked. A man came out. He was somewhere in his 40s, she estimated, maybe early 50s. He was wearing a flannel shirt, long sleeves, which struck her even at the time as odd, given that the Nevada desert in summer is still well above 80 degrees at midnight. He had on jeans and work boots. His hair was dark and slightly too long, not styled, just grown out to a length that suggested either no particular attention to it or a specific choice not to cut it. He moved without hurry. He didn't look at her. He walked across the lot to the edge of the property, the place where the pavement ended and the desert began, and stood there with his back to her, looking out into the darkness. It was strange, but not alarming. People step outside. People look at the stars. She looked back at her pump. When she looked up again, he was facing her. She hadn't heard him turn. The pump was clicking, but the night was so still that a footstep, a shift of gravel, a rustle of clothing would have been audible. He had made no sound, and yet where before he had been facing away from her, now he was facing directly toward her, and even across the distance of the parking lot, 40, maybe 50 feet, she could tell immediately that he was not just glancing in her direction. He was looking at her with the particular fixed intensity of someone who has been watching for a while and has stopped pretending not to. He was completely still. His arms were at his sides. He wasn't doing anything. He was just looking at her with that absolute unblinking stillness, and it hit her. She describes it as a physical sensation, like a cold hand on the back of her neck, that something was very wrong. She made herself stay calm. She made herself look back at the pump. The numbers were still ticking. She had maybe 2 more gallons to go. She counted her breaths. She told herself she was on a public road, at a public business, and there was a person inside and she was fine. She made herself not run. She finished pumping, or she believes she finished pumping. She has since admitted that she genuinely cannot be certain the pump had fully stopped when she pulled the nozzle out, that the last minute or so of standing there is somewhat blurry in her memory, overwritten by the effort of keeping herself from sprinting to her car door. She replaced the nozzle. She screwed on her gas cap. She walked to the convenience store entrance and went inside. The girl behind the counter was young, 17 or 18. She was watching something on her phone with earbuds in, one earbud out, the half-attending posture of someone who is technically at work but is doing the minimum required to qualify. She looked up when Carla came in. She said hello. She seemed completely normal, completely unstartled, and Carla found herself almost irrationally relieved by this. This entirely ordinary teenage girl in this entirely ordinary convenience store doing the entirely ordinary thing of watching her phone during a quiet shift. It felt like proof that the world was still normal. Carla paid for her gas. She bought a bottle of water and a bag of chips she didn't particularly want, partly because her mouth was dry and partly because she wanted an excuse to stay inside a little longer, to let the feeling settle, to give the man in the parking lot time to do whatever he was going to do and go wherever he was going to go. While the girl was ringing her up, Carla asked, as casually as she could manage, who the man outside was. The girl looked up. What man? Carla described him. The flannel shirt, the dark hair, the way he had been standing at the edge of the lot. The girl shook her head slowly, said she hadn't seen anyone out there tonight, said it had been completely dead, just a couple of cars in the last few hours, in and out quickly, nobody hanging around. Said she was alone on the night shift, and the owner had gone home at 9, and she'd been by herself since then. Carla said she'd definitely seen him. The girl, without any apparent suspicion or defensiveness, said, "Come look," and they walked together to the window and looked out at the parking lot. The man was gone. The pickup truck was gone. The lot was empty. The 2 pump islands sat under the yellow light, looking exactly as they had when Carla had arrived, except there was now just her car, parked at the pump, and nothing else. No figure at the edge of the property, no dark truck in the shadows by the wall, nothing but the empty lot and the desert beyond it and the enormous sky. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then the girl said, quietly, that she hadn't heard any car leave. Carla said she hadn't either. Carla walked out to her car and got in and locked the doors and drove. She drove the next 140 miles to Reno without stopping. She did not slow down for construction signs. She did not stop when she passed a town with lights and the option of pulling over. She drove with both hands on the wheel and her eyes on the road, and she did not allow herself to check the rearview mirror more than occasionally, because every time she checked it, she had to resist the urge to check it again immediately. And she knew that if she started doing that, she would not stop. She had the particular experience of someone running from something they can't name. The almost physical sensation of the road behind her being watched. The sense that she had left something at that gas station and it had noticed. It was only when she was in her hotel room in Reno, deadbolt thrown and chain on and the light on in the bathroom, that she let herself go back over the details. The way he had turned without making a sound on a night where every sound was audible. The way the girl had seen nothing, had seen no truck, had heard no engine, despite being alone on a quiet shift with nothing else to occupy her attention. The way the truck had been positioned, not at the pumps, not in any marked space, but off to the side where the light didn't quite reach, facing the road, facing the direction of incoming traffic, as if it had been set up as a vantage point, as if it had been waiting for something to come down the highway. She posted about it a few weeks later. The thread got hundreds of responses. A lot of them were people sharing their own eerily similar experiences on remote highways, because that subreddit attracts those stories the way a light attracts moths. A few were skeptics with reasonable alternative explanations. A local who'd stopped to use the bathroom and left out the back. A truck that had been parked there since before she arrived and she'd only noticed when she pulled in. But one response stood out from a user who said they had grown up in rural Nevada, not far from that stretch of highway. This person said that over the years, there had been more than a dozen documented reports, not police reports, not formal complaints, but forum posts, local word of mouth, conversations passed between people who drove that road regularly, of travelers being followed from that specific area of Route 375, not in a way that ever crossed the threshold of criminal behavior, not chased at speed, just followed. A vehicle that wasn't there when you left the station would materialize in your rear view a mile later and keep pace with you, not gaining, not falling back, just there. Miles would pass, 20, 30, 40 miles of desert, nothing with this vehicle in your mirror. And then, at some point, the vehicle would turn. Not onto a paved road, not at a marked intersection, but onto a dirt track leading off into the desert. A track that didn't appear on any map, and it would simply be gone. Where those tracks led, nobody had ever established. The desert west of Route 375 is owned partly by the federal government, partly by private interests, and is not particularly accessible to casual investigation. Nobody has ever filed a police report specifically about being followed from that gas station. Nobody has ever come forward to say they were one of the vehicles doing the following. Carla updated her post about 2 years later. She had been back through that stretch of highway once, in daylight, driving with her husband. She hadn't told him the story beforehand. As they passed the location of the gas station, she looked over, and it was there. Same 2 pump islands, same yellow overhead light, same attached store. There was a truck in the lot, older model. She couldn't tell if it had Arizona plates. She didn't stop to check. She looked at the station as they passed it, and she felt. She says this is the part that she knows sounds irrational, but that she stands by completely. She felt it notice her. The way you feel noticed by something that doesn't have eyes in any conventional sense. The way you feel watched by a house. She told her husband to keep driving and didn't say anything else about it until they were 50 miles past it. She says she knows how that sounds. She says it anyway, Story 2. The all-night station in Beaumont. There is a specific quality to certain parts of southeast Texas that is different from anywhere else in the country. It's not the heat exactly, though the heat is genuinely brutal. The kind of wet, refinery-scented heat that makes the air feel thick and slightly chemical, the kind that doesn't relent even after dark. It's not the landscape, which is a particular mix of pine forest and swamp and industrial infrastructure that manages to be both beautiful and deeply unsettling, especially at night. It's something about the combination of those things, the heat and the chemical smell and the dark water and the pine trees and the refineries burning off gas on the horizon like distant signal fires, that produces an atmosphere unlike anywhere else. Beaumont, Texas, sits in the middle of all of that. The locals call the region the Golden Triangle, though the gold referenced is crude oil money that had its peak decades ago and left behind a complicated legacy of industrial infrastructure and economic stagnation. It is, to be specific about it, not the kind of place you want to be driving through alone at 2 in the morning. Marcus was doing exactly that in November of 2020. He'd spent the weekend visiting his sister in Houston and was heading back east toward his home in Lake Charles, Louisiana. He'd taken Interstate 10, which is the main route and the sensible route, but somewhere in the miles past Beaumont, something had started happening with his front left wheel. A grinding sound. Not catastrophic, not a blowout, but the kind of sustained metallic grinding that makes your stomach drop because you know it means something is wrong, and you don't know how wrong. It got worse every time he braked. It was the kind of sound that, in daylight, on a road with options, you would immediately pull over and assess. At 2 in the morning, on a dark interstate, far from any town, it introduced a specific kind of low-grade dread. He pulled off at the next exit. He didn't have a specific plan. He just needed to get off the highway, get somewhere with light, look at the wheel, figure out his options. The exit he took was on the far eastern edge of Beaumont, in an area that had clearly been more active at some earlier point in the region's history and had since declined to something less than thriving. The road off the exit was lined with the shells of former businesses: a shuttered auto parts store, a closed diner, a motel whose sign still flashed even though the parking lot was empty and several of the room windows were dark and uncurtained. And then the gas station. He describes it carefully. No chain affiliation, no logo he could place, the kind of total independence that you see occasionally in parts of the country where the big corporate stations haven't fully penetrated. The sign was hand-painted, gas in large letters, and below it, cold drinks. The paint was not fresh, but the lights were on. The door of the attached store was propped open with what he thought was a cinder block, and fluorescent light spilled through the opening onto the cracked asphalt of the lot. He pulled in. He parked away from the pumps, which matters. He didn't park to buy gas immediately. He parked to look at his wheel, and he chose a spot with light rather than a spot at the island, which meant his car was sitting in the open center of the lot. He got out. He could see through the glass storefront a man sitting behind the counter, heavyset, older, reading what might have been a magazine or a newspaper, not looking up. The man showed no reaction to the car pulling in, which is slightly unusual, but not impossible for someone deep in a late-night shift. Marcus crouched down by the front left wheel in the parking lot light. He still couldn't see much, but the smell confirmed something. That faint but specific combination of hot metal and burning rubber that tells an experienced driver that the brakes or the rotor have been doing something they shouldn't. He straightened up and decided the right move was to go in and ask if there was a mechanic nearby who might be open or on call. Maybe get a number, figure out a plan. He turned toward the entrance and saw, for the first time, the second man. He was standing at the side of the building, not at the front, not in the light. At the side, in the gap between where the entrance light reached and the darkness beyond the property line. He was leaning against the wall. He was not doing anything that Marcus could identify as specifically threatening. He was just standing there. But what struck Marcus, what he describes as the detail that lodged most deeply, and that he has returned to repeatedly in telling this story, was where the man was looking. He was not looking at Marcus. He was looking at Marcus's car with a very specific quality of attention that Marcus, who works in sales and has spent years reading how people look at things they want, recognized immediately. It was the look of someone who is evaluating something, calculating something, working something out. Marcus said hello. The man didn't respond, didn't look at him, just kept looking at the car with that measuring gaze. Marcus went inside. The man at the counter looked up. Close up, he was mid to late 60s, thick gray mustache, reading glasses pushed up to his forehead where they'd been when he was reading and forgotten. He had a short-sleeved work shirt that might have been blue once. He asked Marcus what he needed in the tone of someone who asks that question 50 times a day. Marcus explained about the sound, asked if there was a mechanic in the area, asked about motels where he could wait out the night and deal with it in the morning. The man was helpful. He said there was a garage about 6 miles down the road. He gave Marcus the cross streets, but the mechanic wouldn't be there until 7 at the earliest, probably closer to 8. He said the motel Marcus had passed on the way in was fine. Nothing fancy, but fine. They usually had vacancy. He gave Marcus the mechanic's number from memory. He refilled a small paper cup of coffee behind the counter without being asked and set it on the counter in Marcus's direction. He was, by every measure, a perfectly normal small business owner being helpful to a stranger with car trouble. And then, as Marcus was pocketing the mechanic's number and picking up the coffee, as he was half turned toward the exit, the man said, "You got people expecting you somewhere tonight?" Marcus stopped. "Excuse me?" The man looked up from whatever he'd been going back to reading. His expression hadn't changed. "Just asking. Road can be tricky at night. Nice to have somebody know where you are. You have car trouble." Marcus looks back on this and can identify exactly why it wrong-footed him, even though the words themselves were not unreasonable. It was the timing, waiting until Marcus was turning to leave, catching him mid-motion. It was the specific phrasing, not "is somebody expecting you" or "do you need to call someone," but "you got people expecting you," phrased as a question, but with the cadence of an assessment. It was the fact that the man had been reading, ignoring Marcus for most of the exchange, and chose that exact moment to set the reading material aside and make eye contact. It felt less like a concerned question and more like the last entry on a checklist. Marcus said yes. He had people who knew where he was and when to expect him. He said it flatly and with a directness that was not entirely polite. The man nodded and looked back at his reading. Marcus walked out. The man who had been standing at the side of the building was gone. The side of the building was just the side of the building. Wall, shadow, the edge of the property. No figure. Marcus stood in the parking lot for a moment and listened. He heard nothing. No footsteps, no car engine turning over, no gravel shifting, nothing. The man had not gone into the building. Marcus had a clear line of sight to the entrance and the side door from where he was standing, and neither had opened. He had not walked to the road, which was visible from the lot. He was simply not there anymore. Marcus did not call the mechanic. He did not go to the motel. He got back in his car, got back on I-10, and drove with a grinding wheel for 40 miles until he reached a truck stop with a 24-hour Walmart attached. He pulled into the parking lot, locked his doors, pushed his seat back, and slept in the car until it was light enough that the world felt normal again. The next morning, he had the car looked at by a mechanic who happened to be opening up early. The mechanic put the car on a lift and examined both front wheels and both rear wheels and drove it twice around the block, listening for the sound. He found nothing wrong. No wear on the brake pads, no damage to the rotors, no evidence of any foreign material that could have caused a grinding sound. The car was, in the mechanic's assessment, completely fine. He charged Marcus $30 for the inspection and told him not to worry about it. The sound never came back. When Marcus posted about this experience, the community response was large and polarized. There were the expected contingent of people with mechanical explanations. A piece of road debris that had briefly become lodged near the rotor and then dislodged itself. Brake dust under certain temperature conditions. Any number of things that could produce a transient sound and then resolve. These explanations are reasonable. They are probably correct. But the other part of the story attracted different attention. The comment that affected Marcus most came from a long-haul trucker who said they'd been through that stretch of highway hundreds of times over a 20-year career. This person said that exit, the one Marcus had taken, which they described in enough detail that Marcus confirmed it matched, had a name among certain drivers. Not an official name, a nickname passed down through CB radio conversations and truck stop talk, the kind of informal knowledge that exists in communities of people who spend their professional lives on roads most people never travel. They wouldn't give the nickname in the public thread. They said the rule about that exit was simple. You don't stop there at night. You especially don't stop alone. And if you see someone you know pulling toward that exit after dark, you get on the radio and you warn them off before they're committed to the turn. Marcus asked what had actually happened there, what the specific thing was that had earned this place its reputation and its rule. The trucker said they'd heard enough over the years to know the rule made sense, but that they'd never had anything to share that would hold up to scrutiny. Nothing they'd personally witnessed, nothing documented, just patterns. The pattern of people who stopped there at night, sometimes not appearing in the next day's drive time radio traffic. The pattern of vehicles seen at that exit that didn't match any pattern of a business or a resident. The pattern of other truckers who'd stopped there once and, when pressed on it later, changed the subject. The trucker stopped responding. Marcus has checked periodically. The account has been inactive since that conversation. Story 3. The station at the end of Road 9. The last story requires a different kind of setup, because what makes it disturbing is not just what happened, but what came after. When Desiree tried to verify what happened and found that the ground beneath the memory kept shifting. Desiree is a 34-year-old paralegal from Savannah, Georgia. She posted her account to a true crime forum. She's asked that the specific forum not be named for reasons that will become clear, with a preface that she spent longer on than the account itself. She wrote, "I know how this sounds. I want you to know that I know. I know it sounds like I watch too many horror movies, or that I'm the kind of person who exaggerates things for attention. I am not that person. I am the kind of person who, when a building is on fire, walks calmly to the exit rather than running. I have been in 2 car accidents, one of which totaled my car, and I did not panic in either one. I have never in 34 years felt the kind of fear that I felt that night, and it was not the screaming kind of fear. It was the quiet kind, the kind that sits in your chest like a stone and doesn't leave, and I still feel it sometimes when I drive alone after dark, and I need to put this somewhere so that someone else knows it happened." She was driving home from her mother's house in Augusta to her apartment in Savannah on a Sunday night in late March. The drive is about 2.5 hours on a good day, primarily on I-20 to I-95 south, a completely standard route that she had made dozens of times. But she had left her mother's later than planned, and somewhere between Waynesboro and Statesboro, she had taken a wrong turn. She's not entirely sure where or how. She says the road she ended up on wasn't one she recognized, and she doesn't remember making a decision that would have led her there. Her best guess is that the GPS, which she'd been following on her phone mounted on the dash, had quietly rerouted her without the kind of alert she would have noticed, and she'd followed it without really watching it. By the time she registered that she was somewhere she didn't know, she was in Burke County on a 2-lane road with dense pine forest on both sides, no signage she could read in the dark, and her phone showing 1 bar of service, occasionally dropping to none. The GPS was spinning, the little icon cycling in a loop, unable to get a strong enough signal to tell her where she was. Her gas gauge was showing about 1/8 of a tank. She drove. She kept her speed reasonable and her eyes on the road, and she told herself that roads go somewhere, that if she kept going, she would eventually hit a town, a highway, something with a light and a name. She drove for what felt like longer than it was, which is what happens when you're in an unfamiliar place at night. Time expands, distances distort. Every bend in the road is both a potential answer and a potential nothing. Then she saw the sign. It was a plywood sign on a post at the side of the road, old enough that the paint had weathered and faded, but still readable. Gas 1 mile, with a hand-painted arrow pointing left at an intersection that was coming up. She turned left. The road immediately got worse, narrower, more gravel than pavement, the kind of road that in daylight you'd look at twice before committing to in a regular passenger car. But her tank was nearly empty, and she had no signal, and she had no better options. She went slowly, and she kept going. After about 1 mile, as the sign had promised, she came out into a clearing. The gas station was there. It was a single island setup, just 2 pumps under a metal canopy. The canopy old and rusted, the metal marked with the specific long brown stains of decades of Georgia rain. The building behind the pumps was low, maybe 20 feet across, and nearly dark. All the light on the property came from the fluorescent fixture mounted under the canopy, which buzzed audibly and flickered at irregular intervals, sometimes going almost entirely off for a fraction of a second before sputtering back to full brightness. The floor of the lot was packed dirt, not asphalt or concrete. There were no other vehicles. There was no light visible anywhere beyond the property line, just the clearing and then the pine forest beginning again, absolutely black on all sides. On the door of the building was a hand-lettered sign, white paint on dark wood, that said, "Open." Desiree parked at the pump. She sat in her car for a moment. She did not have the feeling of wrongness yet. She was tired and low on gas, and relieved to have found anything at all. And the station looked old and slightly run down, but not immediately alarming. She called out when she got out of the car. No answer. She went to the door of the store and tried it. Unlocked. She pushed it open. The interior was small and cluttered in the way that these old independent stores often are. Shelves that go up too high and are stocked with too little. The merchandise, a strange combination of things that had not moved in years and things that someone had restocked more recently. She registered dusty motor oil in brands she didn't recognize, candy bars in wrappers that looked outdated, a rack of cigarettes behind the counter. The fluorescent light inside was on but flickering worse than the outside light, producing a strobing effect that made the shadows in the corners seem to move. There was no one behind the counter. The register was open, not cracked open, not slightly ajar, fully open. The cash drawer extended all the way, completely empty. The tray had no bills, no coins, not even a rubber band. It looked like the contents had been removed deliberately and recently, the kind of end-of-night clearing out that a business does when it closes. But the sign said, "Open." The pumps were on. The door was unlocked. The lights were running. She went back outside. She started the pump, and it worked. The mechanism engaged. The numbers began ticking upward, and she stood next to her car and watched the gas go in and tried to decide how she felt about all of this. The empty register could be explained. The lack of an attendant could be explained. Lots of independent stations in rural areas operated essentially on the honor system late at night. You pump, you pay at the machine, or you leave cash on the counter. The owner checks it in the morning. She had even seen a small handwritten note on the counter inside that she'd taken to be payment instructions, though she hadn't read it carefully. She was working on being fine about it. Then the sound started. It came from the tree line at the back of the property, maybe 60 feet from where she was standing. It was low and rhythmic, with a quality she found hard to describe. Not quite mechanical, but not quite organic. A slow, regular pulse, almost like breathing slowed way down, with something underneath it that might have been a vibration more than a sound. Something she was as much feeling in her chest as hearing with her ears. She stood very still and listened. She told herself it was a generator. Old stations in places with unreliable grid power kept generators, and generators have rhythms. and she had perhaps never been close enough to one at night in a silent place to really hear what they sounded like. She told herself this firmly. Then she saw the figure. It was at the edge of the tree line, standing right at the boundary where the faint edge of the canopy's fluorescent light petered out into darkness. She could not make it out clearly. It was too far, and the light was too poor, and the tree line behind it was absolute darkness, which meant there was almost no contrast to define it. What she could see was the shape of a person, the approximate height and width of a standing human being, standing completely still, facing her. It did not move. It did not move during the entire remaining time she was there. Maybe 4 minutes, maybe 5. She can't say exactly. It stood. She stood. The pump clicked. The fluorescent light buzzed and flickered. The sound from the trees continued its low rhythmic pulse, and the figure stood at the edge of the light and did not move, and did not speak, and did not do anything except be there. And that was enough. That was more than enough. She finished pumping. She has been asked many times why she didn't leave immediately, why she waited for the pump to finish, and her answer is consistent. Because leaving before the pump finished would have meant moving, and something about the situation had convinced her, in a way she couldn't fully explain, that the worst thing she could do was move suddenly, that the correct response was to be slow and deliberate, and to not show fear, and to not run. She finished the pump. She replaced the nozzle. She got in her car with a measured pace that she says was the hardest thing she'd done in years. She did not put her headlights on full until she was in the car with the engine running and her hand on the gear shift. When she did, she swept them across the tree line as she pulled out of the lot. The light caught the pine trunks, one after another, the bright white beams moving across them as the car turned. Where the figure had been standing, there was nothing, just trees, just shadow, just the absolute nothing of the Georgia forest at night. She made it back to the paved road. She found the county highway. She found I-95. She got home. 2 weeks later, at work, she was describing the experience to a coworker who had grown up in Burke County, a woman in her 40s who knew that area of Georgia well, who had family there, who had driven those roads since she was old enough to sit in the front seat. When Desiree described the road and the location and the setup, her coworker went very still and then asked her to describe it again. Desiree described it again, more carefully. The coworker was quiet for a long moment. She said, "There is no gas station on Road 9. There had never been a gas station on Road 9. She had driven Road 9 her entire life. The only structure out that way was an old foreclosed farmstead, a main house and 2 or 3 outbuildings on an overgrown property that had been sitting empty for years. No gas station, no pump, no store, no business, nothing." Desiree had the receipt. It was thermal paper, which fades, and it had already become significantly harder to read than when it was printed, but the amount was visible. She had paid for gas. She had documentation of having bought gas somewhere. She had a photograph. She had taken her phone out at some point while she was pumping and taken a photo of the pump and the canopy. A blurry night mode phone shot, slightly overexposed at the center from the fluorescent light, the edges of the frame falling into darkness. The image shows the pump clearly. It shows the rusted canopy clearly. It shows the building behind it, its low, dark shape. It shows the edges of the cleared dirt lot, and at the right edge of the image, at the very limit of the camera's ability to capture anything in that darkness, there is a shape. It is not clearly defined. It is dark against dark, but it is there in approximately the place where the tree line began, and it has the approximate proportions of a standing human being, and it is not a tree. They looked up the location together on satellite imagery. Old images, new images, pine trees and scrubland, and, at the location Desiree described, something that might be the overgrown remains of a structure, but no gas station, no cleared lot, no pump canopy, nothing that would account for what she described. The forum thread Desiree posted attracted several people who claimed familiarity with that area of Burke County and who offered either corroborating details or alternative explanations. It attracted one person who claimed the property had a specific local history, though they did not elaborate. It attracted the inevitable skeptics. It attracted, most usefully, someone who asked Desiree if she still had the photo and if she could post it. She posted it. The shape is there. You can see it. It may be nothing. Shadows are deceptive, especially in a blurry, underexposed night photo taken on a phone that is not designed for this kind of imaging. It may be everything. Desiree says that she has not driven alone at night since that trip, which was almost 2 years before she posted the story. She says she's working on it. She says there are days when the rational explanation feels very close. Just an odd night, just a strange station, just her tired brain building a monster out of a shadow and a sound. And a register drawer that was open for any number of completely normal reasons. She says those days are getting fewer. She has not gone back. She will not go back. She says that the photograph, whatever it is or isn't, means she doesn't have to. 3 stories, 3 gas stations on 3 roads in 3 different parts of this country. 3 people who stopped because they had to and drove away, changed. And now, at the end of all of this, I want to talk about the one thing that connects them, not the specific details, not the figures and the trucks and the open registers, but something underneath all of those details that I think is worth sitting with. All 3 of these people described, in their own words, a moment before the fear started, where something shifted, where the situation went from ordinary to wrong, where some part of their nervous system, the old part, the part that doesn't use language, the part that was doing this job long before the rest of the brain developed, registered something and sent up a signal. Not an alarm, not a scream, just a shift, a change in the quality of attention, a sudden awareness of how isolated they were, how late it was, how far from anything familiar they had gotten. We are very good at talking ourselves out of that signal. We are trained to be. We live in a world where most things are fine, where most strangers are not dangerous, where most gas stations are exactly what they appear to be. And we have learned to override the part of us that is not sure about that, because if we didn't, we would be paralyzed. We dismiss it as anxiety, as irrationality, as the product of too many horror movies and too little sleep. And usually we are right to dismiss it, but not always, not every time. These three people trusted the signal enough to leave. Carla finished pumping and went inside and got out. Marcus finished his conversation and walked to his car and drove. Desiree finished pumping and got in her car with a deliberate slowness that she will tell you was the hardest thing she has ever done. None of them ran. None of them acted in a way they would later be embarrassed by. They just left, a little faster than normal, with a little more intention. And they are here to tell the story. We don't know what was waiting on those dirt roads off Route 375. We don't know who those two men in Beaumont were, or what they were assessing, or what would have happened if Marcus had stayed longer, had agreed to wait for the mechanic to open, had taken the offered motel recommendation, and spent the night in that place. We don't know what the gas station on Road 9 was, or is, or whether the word is even the right one to use. What we know is that there are places in this country that exist outside the normal parameters. Places where the usual rules of accountability and visibility and consequence are diminished by distance and darkness and the simple fact that no one knows you're there. What we know is that some of those places are gas stations. What we know is that the people who run them sometimes have reasons for being in those places that have nothing to do with selling fuel. The next time your tank runs low on a road you don't know, on a night that's gotten darker than you expected, and you see that glow on the horizon, take a moment before you pull in. Look at how it's lit. Look at what's parked there and where. Look at who's standing where and why. Listen to the part of you that knows something before you do. And if something feels wrong, if that old, wordless animal part of you sends up its quiet signal, trust it. You can always find more gas somewhere else. You can't always find your way back from not listening. Drive safe, stay aware, and we'll see you next time.